Greetings! It is I, Tentus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome! It's time to continue our discussion on Werewolf the Apocalypse in the World of Darkness. We last left off, we began talking about storytelling. So today for storytelling, I'm going to talk about more of those storytelling elements that's going to be important to you when building your world. Let's start with the mood of your game. What you're going to be using mood for is effectively to give an emotion to your players, to your characters. You're basically showing your players an emotional state that should be reflecting the setting of the character that you're in. As the story pertains to the character, you should be feeling effectively kind of what their character is feeling to a degree. That is the point of the mood, to establish this emotional state. It's understanding what their character is feeling. And many of these emotions should be able to transcend the game because of the mood. And many different moods can be with stories. Effectively, though, you should choose one type of mood to go throughout the entire story. Because you should really have that mood be established very early on and kind of have underlying points of it throughout the story. Maybe ramping it up in places where they could feel more of what that overlying mood is. Basically enhancing the story so that the characters will reflect upon it as necessary and act within this mood as you want them to. Now, the setting is very important. A good setting for your characters can help establish them and get themselves in the world, and whatever you're establishing, they can use their imagination to fill in the blanks, and they can figure out what's all around them using their mind and the words you're saying. A bad basic setting can be boring and distracting at most. Now, you could have an adventure in only one setting, but those are usually short and pretty much just small one-shots. Most of the time, you're going to be going from setting to setting, exploring all these different ones. And as your characters basically encounter them, the better details you give about them, the more that you say about them, the less questions they have about what's going on. The less they have to ask about things, the more that they're involved with whatever you're describing in the story that's linked along with this setting. Now, the advantage of the Werewolf the Apocalypse universe is effectively it's our world. That means you have a basis for what you're describing. You have real-world experience, or can easily gain real-world experience for whenever you're describing these various places and locations, the various settings that you're coming up with. This isn't to say that something fanciful may come up. Places like the Umbra, which don't have a kind of description similar to our world at all, well, then you're going to have to go for something really fanciful and come up with it on your own. It's a lot more work than just basically, oh, I can recognize what a warehouse would look like, add all the details to it. Now, the core to any good story is going to be the conflict in it. This isn't going to be saying combat. This is conflict. Conflict can be resolved peacefully, but is basically coming to a head against two different things. There are 5 main types of conflicts that you really see coming up within a Werewolf the Apocalypse game. Each of them basically is going to be a reflection of the type of story you're going to be telling. You're going to want to choose whichever type of conflict you want towards the beginning of it and effectively make it out. This doesn't mean that other hints of the other conflicts couldn't exist within it, but it does mean you have one main type of conflict you're having to the story that resolutions are going to be against. Garou versus individual is the more likely one you're going to have. Whether this individual is like a member of Pantex, a Black Spiral Dancer, whatever it's going to be. It's that you, as the Garou, are going to be going against some other kind of individual, some kind of thing that you're having a conflict with, that they're causing problems you accomplishing your goal, making it harder for you to accomplish your goal, or maybe going against them is your goal. Whatever it is whatever goal of the storyline you have. It involves running into this other individual and having trouble with them in order to get to that end point. That is the nature of this conflict. A little less common, but there is also Garou for society. When we talk about this, you always think about human society, but that's not necessarily true. It could be conflicts within the Garou society itself. It could be something that's occurring within the society is causing problems for your Garou, for your character, and causing the problems that creates this conflict that has to be resolved. More often than not, when it's Garou versus society, and it does go to Garou society itself, you want to resolve these more than likely peacefully. You don't want to get in trouble with the various tribes and groups within the Garou. You want to keep it reasonable. Now, there's also Garou versus nature, which this seems like a contradiction of a conflict to happen. Why would a Garou have to worry about nature? But just like a human, things like earthquakes, volcanoes, floods, they can hurt a Garu. So more often than not, you can see that the conflict with Garu can occur. Now, it is true that this one is also more often than not a sub-conflict. This is not going to be the primary conflict you're going to be dealing with. Just like in a Garu versus society kind of conflict story, you might have individual conflicts that you're going Garu versus individual within those. When you're having it this way, Garu versus nature, it's usually going to be sub one. So it's going to be like, while I'm fighting this black spiral dancer, a storm is going on, which might cause flooding and causing problems to me. Nature is coming in as a sub-conflict against me that I'm going to deal with while I'm dealing with my main conflict. Now, after that is, of course, Garu versus the unknown. Now, the unknown doesn't come in many forms. Most of it would be, let's say, going to the Umbra. The Umbra is a strange and unusual place. That's a big way of doing unknown. But you could also face unknown. Let's say it's your first time in a city as a Garu. You've never been to this place. You've never experienced anything like this. There's unknown there. So you can see that there's these unknown factors of exploring and jumping into these places that you might find enemies. You might know a little bit about what might be there. There might be vampires or black spirals in that city that you're going to have to deal with. But exploring there and discovering it and not knowing when things may strike against you is creating this conflict of you against the unknown. The last one, of course, is Garu versus self. This is an interesting one because it's the conflicts deep within yourself. This might be trying to get the rage of your own under control, or dealing with the fact that you might have to worry about frenzying. It's an internal conflict and does create some of the more interesting but complex stories to do. Think of it as the Garu subduing the beast, or overcoming a weakness. It's something pertaining to their selves that they have to overcome in a way. Basically, they have to have a conflict with something deep within themselves in order to accomplish the goal that's being set out for them. Maybe they have to overcome a fear, some kind of phobia, something like that, some kind of overcoming, something getting better within their own self, improving their self, and that is the essence of this conflict. Now, when you're storytelling an adventure, it is just going to be like a story. It will have a beginning, a middle, and end. And organizing this beginning and middle end is plotting it out, putting the plot together of your game. It's going to be a series of scenes leading from one another, and each of these scenes pertaining to the plot. When you're beginning it, it should be something that's going to draw your characters in, show them what kind of goals they're going to have, get them excited for what's to come. Your middle portion is, of course, going to expand upon this plot, going to increase the way things are, give them more information, leading up to basically the crescendo, which is the end. The various scenes and the way they're ordered is the plot you're coming up with. A good plot shouldn't just be something that's straightforward and predictable. You should put in little plot twists or subplots that might exist that still pertain to that main story, but you can use them to break it up, that it's not just something that's very predictable. Being unpredictable when it comes to your plot is going to help. Doesn't mean it's not necessarily going to be good or bad because of it. It's balancing it out right. Very simple in this case might be bad, but too complex also might be bad. You want to find that right balance that keeps your characters on their toes to what's going on within the plot, but doesn't draw them away from it too much, so that they keep along this basic line, the story that you're developing from beginning to end. The finale, the end of your story. Think of this as a roller coaster. You've been going on throughout it, and this is the biggest hill you have, the top of the line, the crescendo of the roller coaster, about to dive down into it. This should be the climax of the storyline that you've been building, the end of everything. Whether your characters succeed or fail will depend on the actions that happen now, and the results of the story, the results of what's going on will be evolved from the various actions they take at this point in time. Your characters may have had great highs during the adventure, but this should be the greatest of highs. It should be the most exciting portion, what leads everything to that final push at the end. This is not to say it's the final scene, this crescendo, this climax of the story. You may have a scene after to probably tie up loose ends, put things together, end your story properly. This isn't to say that there might be other story points afterwards. Some of those loose ends could be kept to open up to more stories, the next story you want to tell. Again, you could also just tie all of them up at this little last scene. Not everybody has that last scene. Sometimes your crescendo, your climax is the end of it. But again, not necessarily. That's it for today. I talked about more elements of your storytelling, of your building of the story that we're talking about. I talked about, of course, the mood your characters are going to be in, to establish some kind of emotional connection with your players. I talked about the settings you're going to be entering into. I talked about the conflicts they're going to be having. Not necessarily the combats, the conflicts. Talked about plotting it out, putting your scenes together to build the plot you're having. And I talked about, of course, your crescendo, your end of it. In the next episode, I'm going to finish up talking about your story with the goal. We will talk about the goal, because this is an important one to discuss a little more, before moving into talking about telling the story. This is going to be an important one. Methods of running the adventure that you've built. But if you have any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. It shows support the channel, the empire, the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you can always check out my Patreon. Link to the description below. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.